recording. Great. So I'm going to record this session. So just be mindful of that. If you are sharing things in the chat box, just think about how much you want to share based on the fact that we are recording the session. And let me introduce myself. Hi Lester, good to see you there on the line. Thank you for coming today. One of the things that I normally say when I start these sessions, and those of you who know me and you've been around me for a while will know this, I'm not a brilliant multitasker. So if there are periods of silence while I'm dealing with something with the technology, you have to bear with me. I'm definitely not the world's best multitasker, but give me a little wave in the chat box. Let me know how you're doing, and perhaps let me know if you're experiencing any kind of stress at the moment. You don't have to tell me what it is, but perhaps just give me a score in terms of how are your stress levels at this moment in time. So we normally think about that on a kind of 1 to 10 scale. Are you feeling like you're off the charts with your stress levels right now? Does it feel like it's kind of, you know, the explosion is about to happen, or do you feel like you are completely relaxed and at ease and chill? Just putting in the chat box maybe a score 1 to 10 where you are, and I'll have a quick look at those in just a moment. And checking in on some incoming messages. Okay, we can't use the chat. Okay, is that the case? Can't use the chat function. Let's just see if that is working. Oh, okay, that isn't working. So I tell you what we're going to do then, because we're a small group, chat's disabled. Thank you everybody for telling me that. And I am going to let's see if I can do this. This is where my multitasking is not very good. Bear with me, peeps. I'll be right with you. Tom, was that you that was saying that you were a solid 2?
Yeah, I thought I was speaking to everyone, but evidently it was only to you.
It was to me, yeah. I'm just trying to get people so that they can actually participate. This is a change on my Zoom function.
I can see it as well, Danielle. So I think it maybe it's to do with the participants of the meeting.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Special privileges, Sue. So that's why that's happened, because you're a panelist today. Okay, I've put the talking permitted. Let's see if we can get you onto chatting as well. So what you can do is you can just unmute yourself and just give me a score. What's your current stress levels? Give me a hello, and I can feel mine are definitely going up little by little. So how are your stress levels? Let me know.
Well, through the roof.
Through the roof. Is that Nancy?
Yeah, hi. I can't get my video to work. I'm not sure whether that...
Don't you worry, that's fine. We're in Mercury retrograde, a terrible time to run a webinar, isn't it? Let's just go with that.
Danielle, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hold on just a sec. I just chat to Nancy for a second, then I'll come back to you, Lester. So yeah, through the roof, you were saying, Nancy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I've had 2 different MRIs in 2 different countries in 5 days, and I'm finding out whether I'm going to live or die. Yes. So I would say it's significant.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I know that you're really dealing with a lot at the moment, aren't you? So yeah, that is a huge amount to be contending with. Yeah, well, let's I don't, you know, we're not going to have all the answers this evening.
No, of course not. No,
have some company and some companionship along the way here, so I'm really glad you joined us.
Thank you.
Lester.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm okay. I think stress level probably 40 to 50% maybe.
Right, yeah.
I think I told you I'd done something to my shoulder. I'd had a bit of a sports injury. I think self-inflicted, probably something at the gym.
Yeah.
But I've had an MRI today, so I'm going back to the specialist to look at the results tomorrow. And they don't think it's anything major. They think I've torn or I've strained the two tendons going down my deltoid and my bicep. But
Yes.
it's just annoying to be taken out of my routine. You know, I can't, no swimming, no gym for a while, and
Yes.
you know, all I'm doing is eating Haagen-Dazs and watching Netflix in between work. And even work is a desk job, as I was saying to you the other day at the moment.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm just a little bit frustrated, but yeah.
I can imagine that's really frustrating. And even though the eating Haagen-Dazs and Netflix like sounds like it's a good thing, that can actually amplify our stress levels as well, can't it? So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry you're having a tough time, but hopefully you'll be able to work that through, and that the wait lists aren't going to be too long at this time. So yeah, you can keep talking to me throughout the course of the webinar. Just unmute yourself at any point if you want to have a chat with me, and hopefully I've got you all on open mics there now, and let's get going. So some of you know me, some of you don't. Let me just tell you a bit about myself and also introduce my guests this evening. So my name's Danielle. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm the founder of Pause Global. We're a talent development consultancy, and we work with HR execs in large organizations to help them support the well-being of their people. And then I also do some other things for fun. So one of them is writing books. I really love writing. So I've written 4 books. My 5th one is due to be published in the spring, which is this new one, Walking Meditations. And yeah, also for fun, I enjoy being a sound healer and actually bring some of those elements into the public retreats that we run. And I'm going to talk a bit about the public retreats on this call this evening. And that's why I'm joined by Tom and Sue, and they're going to be having a conversation with me a little bit later on in this webinar about being on retreat. What's it like to go on a pause retreat, on a public retreat, and talking a little bit about their experience after 4 or 5 years of having been on retreat. So in the interim, what is life like since being on a pause? And I know that we could call you serial pausers, couldn't we? I think that might be a suitable phrase that we could use. So both of them have been on repeat retreats. So we're going to talk about why that was, why that came about, and also a little bit about how that has helped them in their lives and what they've been discovering along the way. So I'm going to first of all talk to you a little bit about stress. So let me close this down. So you will probably be familiar with this, that stress remains the main reason that people are off work. So it affects many people in terms of their well-being, in terms of their health, and in terms of their ability to do their job. So it is one of the main causes, or the main cause, of absence at work. So even if stress is not affecting you, it's going to be affecting somebody that you know, and it's a really natural response. And I think that's important to be aware of throughout the conversation when we're talking about stress. Stress is actually a natural response, and it's a natural response if we're feeling under pressure or we're feeling threatened. So our bodies are designed to have this response that occurs when we're experiencing these particular pressures or threats. That is a very natural response. However, chronic stress will occur when we have these stresses for a long period of time. So when we've experienced particular stresses over a period of time, that's where chronic stress can develop. And what I just want to say is, if you are experiencing stress at the moment, any symptoms of stress, and you're not already under medical supervision for that, please make sure that you do talk to somebody. So tonight's webinar isn't about kind of giving you the answer necessarily to being able to recover your health from a medical perspective. So I really want to make that point, that if you're experiencing any symptoms of stress at the moment in your life and you're not under some form of medical supervision, whether that be a general practitioner, whether that be a counsellor or therapist, then please do make sure that you put that support in place for yourself. It's really important to take care of yourself. And we have been experiencing systemically long periods, prolonged periods of stress recently. So it's pretty hard to avoid it, I think, at the moment. And our central nervous system gets activated. As I said, this natural response when we experience stress is that the central nervous system is meant to switch on and then switch back off. But I think what's been happening for a lot of us having prolonged period of stress is that the central nervous system has been switching on and then it's been staying on. So it's been in a permanent state of activation in that fight and flight mode that you'll be familiar with. And what happens then is that we sort of experience this baseline stress as though that is our normal state. And it's almost that we forget that stress is meant to be a response rather than a permanent state. So we sort of forget what it feels like and what it can feel like to be back in a naturally relaxed position, in that rest and digest place. We lose connection to that natural place, and the fight and flight place becomes a constant activation where we have too much adrenaline, too much cortisol being pumped through our systems on a constant basis. And that's when chronic stress becomes a real issue for us individually, but also for us in our organizations as well. So that's what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, some of the context around stress. I'm sure that many of you on this call are already very experienced at understanding what stress is, and you're probably also very attuned to what is causing your stress as well. And yet, having that awareness and being attuned, you may be noticing that that doesn't prevent you from feeling that way. And sometimes having that awareness and being attuned in that way also doesn't mean that you're able to manage your stress and to be able to bring your system back into a calm and relaxed state. So that's one of the things that I wanted to explore today, rather than going into detail about what stress is, because I think there's a lot of expertise that you can look at on that part of the topic, is actually to talk about, well, if you're experiencing stress and you have this awareness and you know that you're stressed, what is it that we might need to think about doing differently in order to be able to manage our stress? So where does the stress come from? I've sort of put this into 3 groups. This is a very condensed version of where your stress might come from. It's going to come from many, many different areas, but if we just point a finger at these 3 kind of particular ideas, one is that it could be environmental. There are a lot of environmental stresses at the moment, and I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, the toxicity of chemicals and pollution, although that is an environmental factor. I'm talking about things like your work environment, your home environment. I'm talking about the relationships that you're experiencing, or the media kind of coming into your environment and sharing a constant kind of message of doom and gloom. These kind of environmental stresses are what I'm thinking about here. So if you're feeling that you're under pressure in the workplace, if you're feeling that you go into a difficult home environment, or if you are constantly kind of scrolling through social media or through the news, then that's the sort of environmental stress that I'm thinking about here. And then we have physical stress. And it's interesting that Nancy and Lester touched on that at the beginning of the call, where our bodies will be demonstrating and displaying different symptoms that can lead us to be feeling physically unwell, and that stress in itself can cause that, and then illness can also cause that, and stress can also lead to illness as well. So we have these different physical factors, and we know that when we're under par, when we're dealing with difficult medical conditions, then that can really take its toll on our stress levels. And then historical, and this is the place I really want to kind of point some attention to, because I think it's an area that doesn't necessarily get talked about as much, which is that some of our stress is coming from within us, from our history, that it is kind of, I suppose, sort of has been imprinted in us from unresolved experiences, unprocessed experiences from historical emotions and difficult experiences that we've had in the past. So these are 3 areas that your stress may be coming from, and that's something to be thinking about. Where is your source of stress coming from at the moment? And then if we're thinking about how do you break the cycle of stress, let's talk about these 3 different areas one by one, because that's really what we're here to discuss. So the first one's quite tricky because the environmental stress is all around us all the time. It's really hard to remove the source of environmental stress. Unless we're going to go and live in a cave on the top of a mountain, which is probably quite appealing to some people, it's going to be difficult to remove the source of stress. Now, when I'm coaching people on a one-to-one basis who are experiencing high stress in their job as an example, then we will talk about how do you remove some of the sources of stress. But it's not always going to be realistic for people to quit their job, as an example. And even if you do that, we know if we think about point number 3, the historical stresses, we're going to take some of that stress with us as well. So removing the source is an option, and it's an important one to consider, but it's not always practical, and it's not always easy to be able to remove the external source of stress. So I know, for example, some people I speak to don't watch the news, they don't read the newspapers, and they don't watch the news. And I'm hearing more of that, actually, people saying, no, I don't want to sort of let the media come in. But that doesn't mean that we've actually removed that source of stress, because we are living in an interconnected world, and because we're part of this big system, you are still going to be feeling the stresses and the results of some of the media input, even if you've removed the source by, not reading the paper and not listening to the news. So removing the source is an option, but it's not an easy option unless we're going to probably go and meditate on a mountain in a hilltop, and even then you might find that the weather is going to be an external source of stress up there. So it is a challenging source to remove. So that's something to think about, because I think often when we're stressed, that's probably the first place that we want to go to, is we want to change the external environment. And that's because it feels like it's the easiest course of action, and it's the most controllable course of action. But as you've heard from some of the things I'm saying, it's not always the easiest thing to do. So the second thing that then I think people move to, once they've thought about, well, I could move house, or I could change my job, or I could get a divorce, and then they realize, okay, all these things aren't necessarily helping, then they start to move to coping mechanisms. And some of those coping mechanisms may be more helpful than others. So we might use things like alcohol or drugs or shopping or gambling as coping mechanisms, or we can be using things like well-being tools, breathing, meditation, thinking about our mindsets, being able to think differently about particular situations. So some of those coping mechanisms you can hear are healthier perhaps than other coping mechanisms. And I think the healthy coping mechanisms in particular are useful for us to be implementing. There's quite a lot of conversation going on at the moment that I'm seeing, particularly on LinkedIn, about burnout in organizations. It's pretty prevalent at the moment, and people are talking about the fact that there's perhaps toxic cultures are causing burnout, and maybe well-being isn't the answer to that. But if we go back to my point a moment ago, changing the environment can be difficult, and certainly if you're looking at changing culture, that can take a very long time to actually shift the culture of an organization. So I do think we need to keep our attention on these positive coping mechanisms, these well-being tools that people are beginning to become more mindful of and more aware of, and support ourselves and support other people to utilize these coping mechanisms on a day-to-day basis, with the view that changing the environment is either difficult or can take a long time. So that's kind of point number 2 in terms of breaking this cycle, is we do need to be able to implement positive coping mechanisms for ourselves. But I think the clue is in the name, isn't it? It's a coping mechanism. So essentially, that is going to allow people to cope for a period of time, but it isn't necessarily going to break the cycle of stress completely. It's going to allow somebody to cope for a period of time, but then they may find that their stress keeps coming back and they keep returning. I remember one of the directors that I coach was saying to me, but I'm meditating every day and I'm still feeling anxious. And like, we can't meditate away your anxiety. In fact, if you meditate, you're probably going to feel more of the anxiety because you become more aware that it's there anyway. And so these mechanisms are helpful, but they're not necessarily the key to being able to break the cycle. So what is the way that we can break the cycle of stress? Unfortunately, it's not an answer that people particularly like, but it's an important one that I want to talk to you about, which is that if we're going to break the cycle of stress, we have to be able to process our upset from the source, from inside of us. So if you remember, I was just talking a moment ago about the historical connections to stress. We need to be able to find ways that we can process our upset. And we've had prolonged periods of stress now for well, at least 2 years, but for some people even longer. And the coping mechanisms have been helping people to cope, and some people have changed their environment along the way, but actually what we haven't been doing is processing how we feel about these experiences. And of course, why would we? Who wants to feel any of this upset, any of this complicated emotional stuff? Like, who wants to go there? And that's why this option is not necessarily one that people want to hear from me, but it's an important message that I want to start communicating more with you, that if we're going to be able to truly break the cycle of stress for ourselves, we've got to learn how to process our emotions from the source that created them. So that's something that we can support with through the retreats that we run. And I'm going to bring Sue and Tom on in just a moment. I'm going to start talking with Tom first of all, because when we talk about processing emotions from the source, I mean, that just sounds dreadful, right? Who wants to do it? It just sounds like a terrible suggestion at all levels. Who wants to open Pandora's box on all of those feelings that we keep pressing down? Nobody, you know. Who wants to feel that kind of pain and the hurt and the distress? Nobody. So the idea that we're actively going to go into a process where we can feel these things can seem very confronting, but that's really what pause retreats are all about. They're all about our ability to step back, to be able to go deeper, and to have a safe space where we can start to process our experience from source. So what I'm going to do, and I put this photo up just to kind of break some of the tension there, because I realize that's quite an intense thing that I'm talking about. So this is actually a real photo of us on retreat in Italy. See, this is what it looks like when you're processing deep emotions. I think this is what it looked like after we'd processed some deep emotions, actually. And Tom and Sue, I hope you don't mind me putting your photo up. I didn't actually ask you that, but I'm going to bring Tom on, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat about how does this actually work in practice in retreat. Like, why would you go on a retreat? What happens on a retreat? And how do you actually feel the benefits of what I've been talking about this deep processing? Like, what does that mean in terms of living your everyday life beyond a retreat? So Tom, are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent.
Good evening, everyone.
To Tom, it's so good to see you. I feel like we've had quite a few touch points in the last couple of weeks after not seeing each other for a while. So it's been really nice to have that time with you. And you came on 2 retreats, didn't you?
Yep. Firstly, July 2018 and then February 2019.
Yeah, okay, so 2 in quite quick succession. So do you want to tell people a little bit about life before you came on retreat? What were you doing? What was your life like? What was going on?
So the stresses that you talked about just now, I think I had all 3, and many others besides. I was in a family business, and well, I can talk freely about it. It was we owned and operated 3 nursing homes, 250 staff, 134 residents, and the other directors of the nursing homes were looking to sell. And you can't sell a business like that open market because it just doesn't work. You end up losing staff, you lose customers, so it's not an option. So I was tasked with selling the business whilst also trying to run it. So about 3 years that process took, mainly because the geographical location didn't appeal to a lot of the buyers that were coming on the market. So it was a long, drawn-out process. So very stressful at work, environmental stress. And then at the same time, maybe not for the first year or so, but it became apparent that my marriage was also breaking down. So I distinctly remember being away for the weekend with family in February 18, and I have talked openly with Danielle about the irony of the fact that I found the pause retreat, but I was just too busy to go on it. I couldn't allocate the time to pause, to take a step of doing something about it. And then it came to the May, and we'd sold the business, and I was handing over to the new people that came on board, and they wanted me for a 12-month contract, and they cut that short after 5 months. And and this was the point also that I realized that my marriage was ending.
It's a lot.
So yeah, a lot of stress all going on at once, and then I refound, or the pause found me, or I don't know what, but I messaged Danielle, and we had an email exchange and maybe then a phone conversation. And you, well, very kindly said, yeah, there's a place for you here in June. And I've not looked back since.
Can you remember how you were feeling at that point?
I think the one overriding term was burnt out. I was burnt out professionally. I was burnt out emotionally. And that, I think I still have my physical health, because that was really important. I was been doing yoga for 20 odd years. That my physical well-being is very important to me. So that was a sort of pillar of strength that I had in my life, and my kids as well, pillar of strength. But my whole professional and emotional life was crashing down around me. So yeah, burnt out would be the one word to describe that, I think, Danielle.
I can remember when you came for the deep pause, how exhausted you were.
Yeah, it just crashed when I arrived.
That's not unusual for that particular retreat, actually. When people come to the deep pause, they're normally coming because they're really, really exhausted and burnt out at that point. So it was the right timing in that sense for you to come. Can you remember for the deep pause what that sort of experience was like? What was it like? Was it your first time on retreat? You mentioned you'd done yoga before. Had you been on other retreats?
I had done yoga retreats, a handful of yoga retreats. This was different, and it was evidently different from the start. The people were different. Well, I told you before, I remember meeting the lady who cooked this incredible food for us all week.
Katrina, yes.
Yeah, and she said to a group of us who were sitting there early on, I came on one of these retreats. I can't remember, it was 3 or 4 years ago. And she said, and I just haven't worked since. And obviously she was being a bit flippant because she had work. You have to work to live, as we all know. But her whole life had changed because of the pause. And here I am now, a similar time has elapsed. And my story is the same. My whole life has changed. And I suppose I reframed what's important to me. And the pause helped me to do that.
Yeah. So I'm interested in a couple of things from that. One is how life has changed, and two, like, how did you get that change to happen? Like, how was pause part of that? How is that, like, what ahas have you had that have led to that transformation?
So I think the main aha for me, dealing with the second question first, was I was brought up in a family business environment, through school and then university, and then always seeing the family business, and with friends and relatives and family, all sorts, that success equals, for want of a better term, success equals wealth. And I think as a society, we're driven to get the bigger house, and then when you've got that, you get the bigger house and the bigger car and bigger holidays, and it's a real a problem with society, I suppose. And I think the pause made me reframe that. And success now to me means quite a few things, but if I was to put it into two, success means health and happiness.
Yes.
Sorry, go on.
I was to say that's very succinct. It means health and happiness.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm no longer, obviously I have periods of stress, but I'm no longer stressed. And I put my health, it's front and center for me. It's very important. I do something every day that impacts on my health positively. So that is really important. And doing things that make you happy. You can't always be doing things that make you happy, but you can find happiness, even little moments, in things that are hard. A smile, a moment with someone, an interaction with someone, a beautiful flower. There are so many things, reading a book, there's so many things that just, possibly all of those things are on a level that's not highly charged, but maybe that's my way of looking at life now, is less highly charged generally. So that's maybe how things have been reframed for me. But you asked about how my life has changed. When I came to pause, I was working 80-hour weeks, and I had 2 kids under 4. And so my life was all about work and my children. Now, I've now got 5 kids, so all under 10. So that's keeps me happy and healthy. Might be some people chuckling at that, but I vowed to myself that I wouldn't go back to that kind of work. I would never push myself to working 80-hour weeks, and I do work hard some weeks, but I appreciate it's difficult for people to be in this position. I maneuver myself into a position where I'll work during the morning, and then I try not to work in the afternoon so much. It doesn't always work like that. Sometimes I have to work all day. Sometimes I have to work all week. But if that happens, then the following week has to be easier. And I make that happen.
Yeah. So you've had a radical shift.
It was pretty radical, yeah. But it had to be. If that hadn't have happened, I don't know where I would be. Yeah, it was drastic, but it absolutely needed to be.
Yeah. I can remember that for myself, thinking in my recovery from burnout was extreme. You know, I took 3 months in complete retreat in isolation by myself, but my recovery had to be extreme because what got me there had been so extreme. You know, working from 6 a.m. till 3 a.m. And surviving on a few hours sleep constantly for a long time meant that my recovery had to be extreme. And that 3 months was just a part of it. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's very heartwarming to hear the transformation and the change that you've been through. What's interesting, Tom, is I don't know that in the deep pause we ever talked about what success was. Did we have that conversation at the retreat?
No, possibly not.
It doesn't strike me that that was something we were talking about, and yet that seems to underpin the transformation that you've gone through, is this redefining of success.
Yeah, I think at the deep pause, I dealt a lot with grief, and maybe for some people that I wasn't grieving a particular person. I was grieving the loss of a job. I was grieving the loss of a relationship, and they were two big pillars in my life. And we went back and went through how I dealt with my first experience of grief as what it was as a 6-year-old, and it turned out that I put it in a box and I didn't deal with it. So then we worked through that. So grief was really what I remember, the overarching matter that we dealt with. We certainly didn't talk about success, I don't think. No.
This doesn't feel like a deep pause topic at all, but that what you're describing, dealing with the grief that had been put in a box when you were 6 years old, that is what we've been talking about in terms of what I've been talking about, the deep processing, process from source. And so isn't it fascinating that it isn't actually that we have a conversation about reframing success? We go to source, we help you process from source, and from there you find the capacity to not only redefine what success means for you, but to completely change your life and the way that you live your life.
Yeah, and I'm sure many people here will look at social media and follow different things. But one thing that you said, there's a lot of people talking about burnout, but one thing that comes up is a little saying, it seems to come up for me, is no one's ever going to say when they reach the end of their journey, when they're here, oh, I wish I'd worked harder. I wish I'd answered more emails. I wish I'd done those extra hours at work. No one's going to say that. And it is a reframing process, I suppose. I do also, there'll be people maybe screaming at the screen going, I can't do that though.
Yes.
But everyone has a choice. And I suppose some of it depends on how much you want to choose to do something. Some choices are taken away. I do accept that. But we still have choices over most of our daily living.
Well, that's why I was framing at the beginning of this conversation about that it can be difficult to remove some of the environmental stresses, because for some people they are going to need to stay within the parameters that they are living in, the parameters that they're working in. It's not always possible to change those, or if you change them, it's not always possible to change them quickly. So that's why having the coping mechanisms are really important, but why then the route to freedom, the key to freedom, is this processing from source. That if you can work at that deeper level, we can all find freedom from within, and that's really what you're talking about here. It's tremendous. I noticed that, hold on just a second, I think it was Vanessa. Vanessa, did you have a question? Let me just see if I can work my get you up and running. Bear with me. Vanessa, there we are. I have to allow you to talk. I think my chat's not been enabled, but does that give you the option to come on the line, Vanessa?
I think so. Can you hear me now, Danielle?
Yes, I can. Yeah, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. I'm so happy to join you, and just wanted to say thank you, Rob, for sharing the story. It was really very brave of you to share it, and I loved hearing it. I was just curious to know how well supported you felt during that journey, both by people in your work environment and in your home environment.
Great question. Tom, over to you.
Not very, actually. A home environment, my life was falling down around me, and work, I was ousted from the sort of handover period, so that the new people took over in the January, and I had a year's contract, which I knew I'd be expellable at some point. I was an expensive asset, but that happened after 5 months. So, and it was, we don't want to see you anymore. So there wasn't really a lot of support there at all. And I was going through some therapy at that point, so I had lots of support there. And then, of course, I went on the pause, and not just Danielle. Danielle facilitates incredibly well on the pause, but the other group members, it's a very cathartic experience, and you become quite close with a lot of the other people that are on retreat. I must say, actually, though, Vanessa, my own personal support comes through journaling. I internalize a lot within my head, and when I can get that out on paper, that's the best thing for me. And sometimes I'll go months without journaling, and then I'll journal for 3 months non-stop. So I am quite an individual a lot of the time. I've got a great support network, but at that particular time, it wasn't so good, I wouldn't say.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know we talked about how you had the conversation with friends after the retreat, and talking particularly after the pure pause, because the pure pause is totally different to the deep pause. So just for those who are listening in, the deep pause is a weekend retreat where we go deeper into recovering from burnout. It's a very nurturing, restful, holding experience. The pure pause was a 10-day retreat, so completely different experience, where we were on a bit of a schedule, actually. We kind of got up early. We were doing our practices early in the morning, and there was a lot of hands-on body work. We had different herbs that we were using for detoxification. There was a whole process that we were going through that was elongated over 10 days. And that's quite a different retreat. Why did you choose to come on that retreat, and why did you come back?
Good question. The short answer is I wanted more. The first, it's a little bit more than a weekend. I'm sure it's 4 days or so.
You did a longer one, yeah.
Yeah, but it was such an incredible experience, such a profound experience for me, and I wanted more. And obviously the setting helped, because it was a beautiful place that we went to. I can't really remember thinking anything more than that. I was obviously on this journey. And it came quite quickly from June to the February. I was still on that journey. I still am, but it was the right thing for me to do. Yeah.
And this retreat was quite, I think, catalytic for you.
Yeah.
I don't know. That just felt like the right description.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah,
really incredible. I had some very deep, profound moments in Italy that I think awakened my some of my more spiritual side, which I've always, I must say, said that I practiced yoga for 20 years, and the spiritual side is something it's always been a physical practice for me. And the last 5 years, it's become a little bit more spiritual. So it is something that I suppose is awakening in me a bit more.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a very deep experience, the pure pause.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from my own experience of facilitating those very deep experiences, when I come back from them, I find it quite hard to put into words what actually happens. Like, it's almost like it's a felt experience. But it's interesting, when we think then this phrase process from source, actually what we're doing is, something like the deep pause, we're clearing out the space in order for you to be able to really connect and process from source, from true source, rather than from the source of the pain, but to come into the spiritual source. And that's really what the pure pause was about, wasn't it? It was about really expanding connection to source and consciousness.
Yeah, and also you have a big theme of nature as well, and that resonates hugely with me. If you take the antithesis of the middle of a city, it is hectic, and there are environmental stresses on you and lots of people. And if you strip all that away and go and sit on the side of a mountain, it does something to you. Just that in itself, taking you out of those situations, is very powerful.
Yes, well, we actually get to connect to source. I think that's what it allows. And people can't see this, but this picture was literally taken in Italy on the side of a mountain overlooking other mountains and a lake. It was the most extraordinary place, and we were very privileged to have that experience together. Tom, is there anything else you want to say before I invite Sue in?
No, I think I've covered most of it.
Yeah, you've been brilliant. Thank you so much for being part of the pause and part of the journey and part of this evening's conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Yeah, and if you've got questions for Tom, we'll stay on at the end and do some more Q&A. So I'm going to invite Sue in just so you can have another person's perspective on how does this work, why does this work, and what's the reality in everyday life. So Sue, are you there?
I'm here, yes. Hello.
Oh, hello. Good to see you.
Hello, Danielle. Hi, everyone.
You are fresh back from retreat recently, aren't you?
Yes.
So tell me, or tell people who are listening a little bit about, well, let's start with you and who you are and what you do, and then we'll talk about the retreats that you've been on. So tell us about you, first of all. Okay.
Well, lots of different hats, I think, really. The one that I always say first is I'm a mother. That's a really important part of my life. I've got 3 grown-up daughters. I'm also a sister, a friend to some very dear friends, and a colleague professionally. I am a solicitor, and that's kind of the different hats I wear in my life, really, I guess.
Yeah. And which retreats have you attended?
Okay, well, the first time I came to retreat was, I think we've laughed about this. I thought, I'm going to do this thing now. I've got time. I'm going to go. I'd been circling around. I'd known about you through another dear friend, and I'd never had time. There was always something else, some excuse not to go. And one day I did have a kind of moment of, I'd been on spas and well-being things and done the odd yoga thing and whatever, but none of those were really touching whatever it was I was searching out. They weren't giving me the kind of the answers to what I was really looking for. And I'd heard about you, and the retreat that you were running that was coming up was the Wild Pause, which was a wild camping and paddleboarding pause, which I signed up on because, again, in my mindset was, it's got to be a challenge, it's got to be tough, otherwise you're not going to get anything out of this. Real truth of it is, never camped in my life, don't particularly want to, and also just paddleboarding around the Cornish Isles. Well, maybe I will do it one day, but you know, I think I probably would have drowned if I'd have taken on the paddleboarding at that time, because I was actually also completely exhausted. And I know we've talked about the fact that when you get on pause, it's never quite what you're anticipating. There's always such a nurturing environment, from the accommodation angle, the food that's supplied, and the support, both from, you know, from yourself, obviously, there's and the other people that you meet that you've never, you know, complete strangers. There's a sort of sense of support. So I was booked on the Wild Pause to come in July 2017, and about 3 months beforehand, something was going to clash that was of major importance, which was my eldest daughter's graduation ceremony. So I contacted you and said, hey, what can I do about this? And thankfully ended up on the right pause for me, which was the deep pause. So I came to Cornwall, and a little bit like Tom, I didn't, you know, I just was exhausted, actually. And I came, and yeah, it's difficult to put into words really what happens when you're there, but I call it the magic. It starts to happen, and you start to relax and breathe, and my shoulders kind of came back down, and I started to sort of move into the experience, and I'd never done anything like it before. Many levels, I'm a very, very shy and quite insular person, so to be in a group setting, well, you can see from the picture, you know, there's sort of lots of people there, and there's a lot of that, you know, but there's also the time where you are doing the quiet work, and I you know, it's just done quietly and gently. I always think it's quite subtle. I don't really notice what's happening, particularly when I'm in the experience of it. It's sort of when I've left, I'm in my environment, that I realize, I'm thinking about that differently, or oh, I didn't do that thing, or you know, just very subtle for me, but also huge. So that was the first time that I came to pause.
Yeah, and do you remember, I love that phrase, by the way, see the quiet work. I think that's a really beautiful phrase. Do you remember what was happening in your life? I know you talked about changing from the wild pause to the deep pause, which was definitely the right move at the time, but what was going on in your world at that point?
Well, I'd had, I suppose, quite a prolonged period of intense stress. My situation is that I'd become a single parent 10 years before that to the 3 girls that I've got, and I didn't really have, and I didn't take time to stop and process what had happened, that my marriage had broken down, and that I was so busy in their lives and also working, and I was stuck in an absolutely toxic job situation, but I felt very trapped in it, and that caused me also a lot of very on a deep level, a sense of, well, I've got to stick this out, awful as it is, because it fits around all of my other responsibilities. And that was the truth, it did.
Yes.
So I was angry.
Changing the environment can be hard sometimes.
So there was a lot of you know, there was a lot of, I never really admitted it. It took someone else to say to me, you're under such stress, and I didn't realize, and in me it does come out in physical ways. It comes out in my you know, it'll come out in my skin and other physical ailments, if you like, you know, and I would just literally be moving from one to another, constantly thinking it was because I, again, wasn't doing the right thing, so I'd be on, you know, one regime after another, constantly searching for and circling around to find what the answer was that was going to make me feel better.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering what the question was when you said earlier that you were searching, whether you knew what you were searching for.
Well, no, I didn't. I didn't really know. I just knew that there had to be a different way of living, and that it was something I couldn't. I'd read umpteen self-help books. I'd had some targeted counselling, some okay, some not so okay. I'd been, as I say, searching, but I didn't really know how to find the help that I needed to. I was aware I needed to change things, because I was, you know, I was just really sort of rolling from one part of life to the next. I wasn't really living my life. I was doing a lot of things, but I wasn't really being in my actual life, and it was flying past me. 10 years had gone by, and nothing had changed for me. In fact, in many ways, it had just become a progressive cycle of stress and unhappiness. So yeah.
And along the way, so since you attended the deep pause, you've been on the pure pause with Tom at the same.
Yes, that's where I met Tom.
You went on the same deep pause, but you were at the pure pause together. You've been to the instant pause, and then you've been to the transcendent pause recently. We'll talk about that one that you've been recently. Did I miss any? Was that?
No, that's it. I know I sound a little bit like a serial pauser, don't I? But there have been gaps in between. Yeah, there have been. So it was 2017, and the pure pause was this early part of 2019. So, and then this year I came to a day-long instant pause, which was great to do, and then the transcendent pause in July. So
there's a journey that you've been on, and as you described, doing the quiet work over time. And I had always designed pause in that way, that people could come in and have different experiences. You didn't need to go on a retreat. You could come and have a one-day pause, or you could have some coaching, or, you know, attend an online session. That it didn't always need to be about going on retreat, but that the retreats were where you could do some of this deeper processing work. For you, has there been any particular aha moment for you? Anything that's really kind of stood out for you?
I think, well, I think I shared one with you recently at a family gathering, where I realized that I'd let go of a lot of things that were holding me back, and that simply, it happened quite subtly, that I just simply allowed a situation that I couldn't have imagined 10 years ago that I would have allowed or been happy about, and it felt the most natural and okay thing to do, and in fact it was very much the right thing to do. And I did it without any sense of there was no premeditation to it. It came from deep inside, that part, that hurt, that thing is over. It's absolutely you know, it was just spontaneous. And it was afterwards again that I suddenly reflected on, wow, you know, I can do that. I can do that quite happily, and be very happy about it, and be very happy about the effect it had on those closest to me as well, which was the main, you know, of main importance to me. So the aha moments can often be, well, for me, they've often been after the pause, and that proves to me that the work is ongoing.
Yes.
And that it's subtle, and that it's
I've been running these retreats for 10 years now, and it was when we got to the pure pause, where people had a chance to be on other retreats and then come for that longer retreat in Italy, that I realized how much work was going on in between the retreats. And your story was definitely one of them. You'd really changed and transformed in that time, and taken your life in a different direction.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely. And not, you know, there are smaller aha moments. As I say, for me, it hasn't been a big light bulb as such, but in many respects it's a sort of ongoing process of many of them, and the more you become observant of that, it's almost as if they gather pace as well, if that makes any sense to anybody that's listening. It's almost as if it's sort of, oh, okay, right, so this, you know, I've just found an ability to allow things to be, rather than trying to be the fixer, the doer, the sorter, standing aside and allowing things which I just didn't seem to be able to do, as just happened over that period of time, which is the biggest aha, I guess.
Yeah. When you talk, it sounds to me that there's a sense of strength that has developed in you over the last few years.
Yeah, and you know, the last few years have been probably some of the toughest of my life as well. I mean, I mentioned 10 years ago, you know, a breakdown of my marriage and starting again, single parent, but the last few have been peppered with what life is about as well, which has been a lot of grief. I've lost both my parents, was made redundant from a job, and you know, just all sorts of other things going on, but the big ones like that. And I'm not sure I would have had the you know, the inner strength that I've found from being able to flip things and see things in a different way, which has very much for me come from some of the you know, and it's not like classroom teaching, it's from very subtle things that happen when you're on pause, because we can be doing, you know, I remember sitting out on the beach in Cornwall and, you know, gathering stones, but when you're doing those things, you're actually doing something that is very different. I'm being directed to do something very different, and what's happening inside and what's going on at that time or afterwards is yeah, it's been something that's given me a great deal of strength. You're right, absolutely, to deal with the big stuff that is part of life, really.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I talk about with pause is there's a power in the simplicity. We really do strip back to the simplicity, to that place of stillness, the still point inside from which you can begin to orientate and move in the world. And yeah, I really love coming back home to that place. And when you're talking about that strength, it made me think actually from that place of strength, it meant that you could also feel the joy that you felt recently, that you were sharing about that moment that was just spontaneous, that unfolded for you in a way that was very unexpected but was very joyful. Yeah, it's so wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing your experience. Is there anything, actually we should just touch on the last retreat that you went on, because you joined us in July for the Transcendent Pause, which for those of you who don't know, this is one of the advanced retreats. So the Pure Pause in Italy is an advanced retreat, the Sacred Pause in Bali is an advanced retreat, and then the Transcendent Pause that we were doing in Cornwall recently is also an advanced retreat. And this one is an advanced retreat because we are working with a particular kind of medicine. It's called Kambo, and it's administered by a shaman. And it's not an easy journey, I think would be fair to say, but it's an incredibly strengthening journey, and I can talk more about what happens with regards to Kambo and how that works. But why did you choose to go on the Transcendent Pause, and what was that like for you, Sue?
Well, I think why I chose it was I wanted that side of things. Has been something that has opened up for me gradually over the period of time. The interest in the spiritual, the shamanic side, a deeper interest in understanding, you know, the power of these things that in Western civilization we've completely lost touch with in many respects. And so short of being able to travel to the Amazon, which wasn't going to be happening anytime soon, I was just interested to have that experience, really. And it is an experience. It's not for not for the faint-hearted, really, but it was it felt also a little bit like the Pure Pause, a sense of wanting to reset and draw a line and reset and kind of move across the line. And I think in some ways that sort of purging experience allows you to do that.
Yeah. And how did you feel before you went into the experience, before you did the Transcendent Pause?
Well, because because of the way in which the whole experience is explained, the thoroughness that you provide, and I felt a great deal of trust because of that. All questions were answered. You know, Richard explained in a great deal of detail what would happen. So I don't know about the other participants, but I certainly felt a kind of close sense of support. But also, I mean, yes, anxiety, that was I doing the right thing? Was something, you know, was it going to be diabolical, as Richard said it? You know, you're doing something that is making you put yourself in a very vulnerable position, effectively, with people who are, you know, strangers to you days ago. So yeah, but I was determined to do it, and I'm so pleased I did, because the subtle work that came out of that for me, what it brought up for me, and what that made me realize I'd been closed off to in myself, was really, it was oh well, I said I didn't have one big aha, it was another aha moment of okay, that's doing that thing has actually led me to realize this over here was quite a block for me, and I needed to release that. And it certainly, you know, that's sort of was major for me. So
it's a powerful processing through a different route to the route that we were talking about, perhaps the processing of grief at the deep pause. Here at the transcendent pause, we're really going into clear liver and clear gallbladder and clear physical, emotional toxicity that's living in the system, and literally removing that to gain insight, to gain perspective, and to gain energy and forward momentum, actually.
Absolutely.
It's another experience. It's quite hard to put into words, isn't it?
Yes, you have to live that one too. Yeah.
Seeing is believing, for sure. So is there anything else you wanted to share? I'm conscious I'm running over time, so I just want to start to bring things to an end, but is there anything you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think I mean Tom covered so much of it really, you know, really eloquently. So thanks to Tom, because I think he said a lot that I would just say ditto to. But just that I just would, you know, if you're thinking about the pause, I think really that circling feeling that I had, it's just kind of go and do it really, and see, because I don't think you can go wrong. And if nothing else, you will have good fun too, because you know, it's hard not to you know, the photograph says it all. We had a lot of laughs and giggles. This thing's happening subtly to you. It's not sort of sitting there in a big circle, all very grim and dull, and you know, everybody sort of wailing. It's not, my experience of it is nothing like that. And just the places you find, I mean, Kabila in Cornwall, just amazing. And you nearly got me camping, so I mean, that says it all, doesn't it, really? I know the quoits are wooden buildings, but they're pretty close to camping for me. But wow, amazing. I mean, beautiful comfort, and fabulous food. So yeah, what's not to like, really?
Absolutely, and you may have some life-changing experiences along the way. These are some shots from Kabila in Cornwall. This is our retreat centre that we use, and we're partnering with in Cornwall. So, and this is the actual space, and this is a quoit that Sue's referring to, which is a beautiful wooden A-frame structure where you're sleeping out, you know, on the edge of a woodland in an area of outstanding natural beauty, in a dark sky area. So yeah, it's a really special place. The woodlands are spectacular, and one of the things we do is participate in a tree planting process with Kabila, where we're helping them to replant oak for future ancient oak woodlands. So we're really excited about that particular partnership with them. So if you are interested in retreating with us, we've got 2 retreats coming up next year. The first one is in May, called the Reflective Pause, and this retreat is going to be really about the stillness and the introspection. So we're going to be processing through silence, through being in nature, through meditation, through yoga. We're going to go in through a really, really gentle route through the reflective pause, kind of that tenderness and that holding through an unfolding of what's within. So the reflective pause, if you imagine it like a kind of river meandering through, that's the experience that I'm looking to create with the reflective pause. Lots of time around the fireside, and time for you just to really step away and be with yourself. And then in September, we're back with the Transcendent Pause. This is a more advanced retreat. Usually I would suggest you come and do one of our regular retreats, like a reflective pause or a deep pause, before you do the transcendent pause, or that you have some coaching with me before you enter into a retreat like the transcendent pause, simply because of the level that we're operating at. We need to make sure we've cleared some space for you before you go into a deeper process, and that process is using Qigong, it's using transformational breath work, and then it's using the work with Richard that Sue mentioned, who's a shaman who supports us with the Kambo ceremony in the Kambo circle, as well as me weaving it all together with the kind of pause magic as Sue was describing. So these are 2 retreats that are happening next year, and if you are interested in that, you can just put a little Y in the chat box. Oh, if we're actually active on the chat, we're not, are we? You can message me, you've got my email, just send me a little note, and I'll get back in touch with you with more details about the upcoming dates and the prices and all of that sort of thing. But for now, what I'm going to do is just open up, there's my email address if you want to get in touch. I'm just going to open up the mics if anybody's got further questions. If you want to talk or ask any questions, then now is a really good moment to do that. Thank you, Sue. That was wonderful to hear your story. So just opening up the mics if anybody has any questions, if you want to say anything as we're coming to the end. I appreciate you staying till this point, by the way. You've done brilliantly to still be here past 8 o'clock. And obviously if you're ready to pop off, that's also fine, not literally, just figuratively. Eloise.
Hey Danielle, thank you for today. Thank you to Sue and to Tom. That was really, really interesting and really great to hear from you. So thank you very much for that. I was just wondering, in terms of attending retreat, you know, obviously I've spoken with you about this before. It's actually something my husband would like to do as well. And I was just wondering, is it in terms of people coming as, you know, with somebody they know, how does that work? Do you think that's a favorable thing? Is it better to come, you know, by yourself and to experience it with other individuals who are also by themselves? I'm just wondering what you advise with that.
Yeah, did you say it was your son who was interested?
No, sorry, my husband.
Your
Although
husband.
sometimes, yeah.
Yes, yeah, sorry, that would have been a different response, that's all, so I'm glad I clarified that. Yeah, actually in that photograph that I was showing from the retreat, we had a husband and wife couple at that particular retreat, and it has happened at others. It's completely possible to do that. I think you'll get a different experience if you come as a couple than if you come alone, and it just depends on what you feel that you need at that time and whether you think going through that together is advantageous. So yeah, I would probably have a chat with you about that on a one-to-one basis and just talk it through and help you kind of figure out what you think is best for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Danielle.
Great question. But yeah, we've had husband and wives. Normally what happens is the wife brings a husband, to be honest. But on that instance in Italy, it was that the husband brought the wife, and yeah, it was a lovely unfolding. Good. Any other questions or comments, reflections, anything else you want to say as we come to the end? Everybody's in stunned silence. It's either that.
Danielle, I suppose just to say thanks to Sue and Tom for sharing, and that I related a lot to what they were both saying. I think, especially when we talk about trauma and having been through similar experiences, it's the weirdest feeling in the world. And I suspect Tom and Sue can hopefully both understand when I say, sometimes I think Tom mentioned something about internalizing, and the whole internalizing process was, for me, just avoiding friends and avoiding people asking me questions that I didn't have any answers to. And that kind of got me to, I don't really want to talk to people because they're going to ask me questions. I don't have any answers. And maybe, as Sue was saying, the fact that she was on a beach with strangers, with strangers, they don't have to understand anything. You don't have to tell them anything. You choose what you want to share or how much you want to share or nothing at all. So I think, that pressure from friends and from people that wanted to know the full story of, the breakup or whatever, the grief, just made me feel even more stressed. And for 6 to 7 months, I just not responded to friends, and I marginalized quite a lot of friends because of that fear, because just having to talk to them meant I'd have to go through and give them details because they'd be asking me questions, and I myself don't have any answers. So it's that cycle where what seems to be support caused me to feel more stressed.
I completely understand that. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting reflection. And one of the things we talk about, Lester, at the pause is that whenever people come, you can have your own experience, which means that you participate in whatever way you want to participate. That if you don't want to join in and do something, that's absolutely fine. If you don't want to share, that's absolutely fine. That there's no expectation that you be anywhere other than where you are at the pause, because that's the whole point of the pause, actually, is you just be where you are. Even to the point of, when we talked about Cambo earlier, that people can make a choice right up until, and even when they're in it, to stop that process. So that there's always this permission to just be as you are in that moment, and whatever that looks like. And if that means that you spend your pause sleeping for the whole time, that's how you spend it. I'm really clear about that. There's no expectation to be anywhere other than where you are.
That's really good. Thank you.
Thanks for your observation. Appreciate that. Anybody else want to say anything as we come to an end? I think we may have completed. It's been really lovely to spend the evening with you in this way. Thank you so much for being here, and my special thanks to Sue and Tom, not only for sharing with us so honestly and sharing of themselves so fully, but actually for being warriors who are prepared to do this work and participate in pause in the way that they have. It's been a real joy to be with you. Thank you so much, and sending lots of love to everybody. Go well in your part of the world, and I look forward to connecting with you sometime soon.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, Lester. All the best.
Bye. Speak soon.
Take care. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for being here. John, are you still there with us? Just checking if you are there. You may or may not be. You may have disappeared. I'm going to stop my recording.